pleasure to introduce, come on up, Matt. Matt Roszak is one of the first people that I met in the space. You know, Bruce is famous for his fiery passion, parading around stages and really firing people up. And I always think of Matt as kind of like the Obama of the blockchain world. It's nothing ruffles him, never has a crease in a suit. You know, he's getting on planes left and right and is just calm as a cucumber and just makes amazingly intelligent moves in the space. And so we're going to sit down and talk.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I've heard this story before, but I'd like to hear it with a 2018 perspective. What got you into Bitcoin and this whole blockchain world?
So I've been an investor and startup entrepreneur my whole career, investing in tech companies, building tech companies. And the one thing I was always missing is the change the world kind of dynamic, both in the stuff I was investing in or building. I was building pragmatic stuff like HR solutions and video surveillance, software as a service companies, and taking them public and just kind of doing good tech deals, building. But I was always missing that. And I always, when I found entrepreneurs that said, well, I'm building this this technology or this app or this infrastructure and it's going to change the world, I was always like, man, I wish I had something like that. So by 2011, I was chairman of a social gaming company in Singapore and came across Bitcoin and social gaming. When you're moving money, wire transfers, PayPal, credit cards across 9 countries, payment processing becomes a core competency quickly. So when you see Bitcoin, it's almost like too good to be true, and I discounted it initially. And then as I kept learning more and more about it, read the white paper, I realized that there was something here that was going to change the world. It was like, money without banks and governments and this financial sovereignty, and could not have imagined the Cambrian explosion of all the other decentralized digital cooperatives that get built with blockchain tech and these tokenized networks. But I was like, this is one of those things, and so I stopped literally doing everything else I was doing at the time and went, full on crypto.
So that would have been 2013, right?
Yeah, 2012, 2013.
2012, 2013. And so we met in 2013, and I think before Tally Capital, it was called Silk Road because of some of the Asian things, and obviously that became a bad name after 2014. So
it was an interesting name because
it's got attention.
So I co-founded a private investment firm called Silk Road Equity. Okay, notice the namesake. And at the time it was like this ancient trading route between Asia and Europe, and we're gonna like call some of our companies saffron and like some of the things that were traded on the Silk Road. The first company we formed and founded was called Silk Road Technology, which if you're in the HR space and you go on silkroad.com, that was a company I co-founded and does learning management and compensation management, all this stuff in HR. So really useful technology. And then you have like these Google alerts that you set up on company names. So like early days, I was just kept saying Silk Road and like Bitcoin and drugs. And so it wasn't just that. I mean, it was this intersection of all these things in Singapore and, just like, somebody says, hey, go to this restaurant. And you're like, okay, one person told you, whatever. But if like 10 people tell you and these 10 things start to, irritate and inspire and all this stuff, you kind of drop what you're doing and learn more about it. So that was an interesting one. And I was in Berlin one time on stage and, on a panel, I think it was probably even with you. I get off stage and someone goes up to me, he's like, so you're the Silk Road guy. And I'm like, yes, Silk Road Equity, whatever. He's like, you must have a good lawyer. It's just like, dude, come on.
It's funny. So the original Silk Road, which then became Tally, similar to kind of a Pantera early model where you were buying Bitcoin and then also buying sort of picks and shovels, wallets, exchanges, sort of the early companies that were really, that was the early opportunities for entrepreneurialism around the same time that David Johnson and I started BitAngels.
Yeah, no, and that was a big inspiration. So I remember back in the early days, 12 or 13, I was the BitAngels rep in Chicago, and that was like it was cool the network you guys were building.
We are bringing it back, by the way. And is David Williams in the room? Right over here. He's the new executive director. We're actually going to build it out to so I'll get your recommendation because you're too much on a plane. Who Chicago would be good for? Who would be good there?
No. I mean, it was a great network to kind of vet deals back then, and so yeah, early days in 2013, and by 2014, invested in about 23 different bridges, roads, and tunnels. So wallets, payment processors, exchanges, miners, software layers, and these were some of the early folks walking around with PowerPoints. So this was like Kraken, Coinbase, Zappo, BTC China, RoboCoin, first Bitcoin ATM that was actually founded here in Vegas. So yeah, and that
Fireside chat at the first CoinAgenda too.
Really, with Jordan?
You were here.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
You might have stepped out of the room at that point.
But so all those investments in these operating businesses kind of developed this node and this network and kind of a heat map of the space that kind of helped you, meet great technologists and kind of see how the space was evolving.
And so, how did your thinking change after Mastercoin, Ethereum, and sort of this, as they called it at the time before the ICO word and even the blockchain word came out, Bitcoin 2.0?
Yeah. I mean, what's interesting about the space is that it is a constant, movie, and the ground shifts underneath your feet, and there's nothing static about it. And so, you start in the early days as a Bitcoin maximalist, and it's like, hey, what could compare with this? And people are building projects, and the minute you circulate a project or launch something, you get trolled by some people, you get applauded by other people, but the font of innovation in this space is incredible. And seeing this explosion of all these other projects and tokenized networks is exciting to me because nobody's really figured it out in terms of scale and adoption and utility and all these things. But you're still seeing people trying to solve these hard issues and innovate. And so I quickly see one of the interesting parts back then was seeing firsthand Vitalik. He was big time into Bitcoin. I mean, I remember
founded Bitcoin Magazine.
Yeah, Bitcoin Magazine. So I'm an investor in BTC Media. We bought Bitcoin Magazine, but I remember paying Vitalik in Bitcoin to write articles, and then he wanted to build Ethereum originally on top of Bitcoin, and that community wasn't really conducive to people engaging, and so he's like, screw it, I'm going to build my own network. And that kind of led into Ethereum, and there was a new Ethereum maximalism going on, and all the stuff that was going on there. But again, it's like a movie, and you see all these things that are additive to the space. And so I invested in every Ethereum killer on the planet. So whether it's EOS or Tezos or Quantum. Yeah. So no one's really figured it out, but it's good to be part of that journey and seeing how they kind of approach, the smart contract, global computing, dynamic is still, wet cement at best today.
I mean, it's interesting, sort of, it's a fine line between the wisdom of the crowds and mob rule, right? And, it's not that long ago that people were talking about the flippening when the price of Ethereum market cap would exceed Bitcoin, and would things start being quoted in Ethereum instead because Bitcoin had its scaling issues. Segwit comes along, Ethereum has a couple of issues, and then all of a sudden, ICOs, as Vinny Lingham mentioned yesterday, are spending Ethereum to fund themselves, and people aren't accepting being paid in Ethereum. And then all of a sudden, a TechCrunch article comes out and says Ethereum is dead, and the price goes down under 200. How do you analyze, kind of just the wide swings in market sentiment and make intelligent long-term decisions about Ethereum, about EOS, about things like that?
Yeah, and then there was other flippening recently with Ripple being worth more than Ethereum, or pretty close to it, which you could have never imagined. Seeing these networks and what Ethereum taught the crypto community is that community matters. It's like launch a white paper, get a kernel of code out there. But the trick, the real feat in this industry is to inspire a whole group of people to paint the fence for you. And you could build the first mile, but the last mile of apps and all the kind of end state innovations got to come from the thousands of developers. And so now, with every EOS and Tezos and everybody that's coming out has, as we're all seeing, $1 billion sidecar fund, hiring some of the best and brightest in industry to build a megaphone and really capture the hearts and minds of developers. And the question is, will these developers be very tribal and say, hey, I'm an Ethereum guy, just like I would say I'm a Chicago Cubs fan and you're Red Sox, so we're ingrained and we're tribal, or will these developers kind of go in and out of different protocols and swarm in and out like bees or kind of birds from protocol to protocol? And so that'll be interesting to see how this community engagement piece. I mean, it's great to be a developer in the space. You have lots of capital, lots of innovative railroads to work and play on, and so once that starts to get a little bit more into focus, I think some of these networks will re-sort rank on CoinMarketCap.com.
And this is a good segue point to when we had a chat and you said, I'm looking to actually move to the other side from investor to entrepreneur and launch bloq. And you're still investing, and you've now launched bloq and many other companies underneath it. I mean, I think I'm busy. You're just like crazy busy, and you're still like, don't break a sweat. So tell us about the genesis of what Jeff and you have put together with bloq and Metronome and some of the other things that have spun out under that whole, entity and sort of like family of companies.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's been a really cool journey starting bloq and kind of where we got to today. But I started as an investor in the space, and that was, again, to kind of build that heat map and that node network of technologists and companies and seeing what was happening. So that gave a good education on what was going on. Through all that, and I still keep investing today, it's timing-wise, it's about 1% of what I do. 99% is all about building bloq. And so in meeting some of these technologists, I came across Jeff Garzik about 4 years ago, and we got along right away. Jeff is in this really rare Venn diagram of, he worked on the Linux kernel with Linus Torvalds. So if you're running Android on your phone or Linux in your data center, you're running on his code. And then he was also one of the early Bitcoin Core devs and worked on Bitcoin with Satoshi Nakamoto. So it literally went from Satoshi to Gavin Andreessen to Jeff. I mean, he was like that early. So that intersection of working on two of arguably the most important open source projects in history. So he was a rare bird from that standpoint, and just a great technologist, great visionary. We complement each other really well. And I like building companies. Investing is, on one hand, not that time consuming in a particular way. Once you kind of seed or invest, there's only so much kind of interaction you have. And so seeing where the kind of the trajectory of the space was going in terms of what's been built, what needs to be built, adoption, there's just so much work to do in this space. And so we launched bloq, and today bloq goes to market in two different ways. Our tagline is the tokenization of things. And so we don't build things that will save $1 or a day in trading and settlement, or any of the things that you read that either B3I or R3 or any kind of consortiums to use blockchain as a glorified database. Call IBM, call Accenture, call Deloitte. They'll do a great job of doing that. I mean,
you're kind of, if I'm trying to give an analogy, kind of the consensus of Bitcoin, right?
Well, I think consensus
with a Y.
Consensus is a great platform, great model. Joe's a dear friend. I would say the only difference in that is we are multi-chain, multi-token, multi-network. We don't think it's going to be an Ethereum world or an EOS world. We think it's going to be a constellation of chains, and so we build all our stuff that way. And so bloq goes to market in two different ways. One is bloq Enterprise, and one is bloq Labs. Bloq Enterprise, again, this is the connective tissue for tokenized networks. So we build multi-currency wallets, nodes, dev environments, data analytics. So all the things you need to engage in tokenized networks. And so not just generic blockchain stuff. So if it doesn't have a token, we're really not interested. Doesn't get our developers excited or inspired. And so that shores up the target market for us. So lots of Fortune 500 companies are doing blockchain stuff. The ones that are doing crypto, there's a discrete amount of them thinking about
So on the
that
Fortune
space.
500 side, I know the original vision was don't put it on Hyperledger, put it on Bitcoin, because it's got way more developers working at it. Has that morphed at all, or is that still pretty much the mindset that a public blockchain is going to have more stability than putting something on something that's controlled by the Linux Foundation?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the use case. I mean, right now, the two flywheels going on between speculation and blockchain utility. Speculation is kind of been the name of the game over the last few years. The blockchain utility, it still needs to find itself, in terms of scale. And everybody's well read about CryptoKitties and how Ethereum works and should work, and then everybody else's blockchain. And again, the ideas and the inertia is profound, but in terms of that flywheel on utility, throughput, transactions, whatever, is still ho-hum. It's the amount of brain power and capital that's going against that is pretty amazing. And so once we see that turning, the speculative thing will even go a lot crazier. It depends on the use case,
So you're using both private permission and public now for your clients, or?
Mostly public blockchain. So for a large asset manager, we built their multi-currency wallet. So we're building stuff to engage in public.
I was going to say,
networks.
you have one of the core devs of Bitcoin on your team.
Yeah.
He's silly not to
Yeah.
utilize that.
And what you look at is bloodlines. So you go Bitcoin bloodline, and you have Bitcoin, Bitcoin Cash, Zcash, all the derivatives of that bloodline, and you have Ethereum and all the ERC20s. And so between those two, you kind of capture a big part of the market. And now my developers can't stop thinking about EOS. It's a very big kind of magnetic pull for them intellectually. So we're spending a lot of time building EOS stuff. We've done stuff on quantum. And so again, it'd be a constellation of chains, the internet of chains. So we're not going to just ride one particular horse.
Rootstock, Ravencoin.
Neo. I mean, there's plenty of them out there. So we're being pragmatic about Polkadot, exactly. So we're being pragmatic about what tech decisions we're making, and then so that's our software stack. And we have two types of customers. We have Fortune 50 customers, so a lot of big banks and asset managers that want to engage in crypto. And then on the other side, and this was a big surprise that's happened over the last 18 months, is the Crypto 50. So our customers there are Bitmain. And
I like that, the Crypto 50.
Yeah. So the Fortune 50, Crypto 50, those are our target market. And
hopefully the Crypto 500 at some point in the next decade.
I'm sure. So these are customers that again took us by surprise. There's a new enterprise customer on the field, and they're Bitmain and they're Circle and they're talking to other of these tokenized networks that want to engage us for the software we have. Is if you can think about it as porcelain around their plumbing. They're building infrastructure and plumbers, but all the finished products around it are still little non-existent. And so we help these networks and a lot of these players with their software. On the other side,
labs, Metronome.
Exactly. So on labs, we build new tokenized networks and applications. So we were 2.5 years ago, we were approached by a lot of people that were raising $100 million or just raised $100 million, and they're like, yeah, we gotta now build this stuff. And so we're like, oh, we'll help and advise. And at the end of the day, we're plumbers, we're builders. That's what we do. And so we helped Quantum with their EVM. We helped Architect on Civic. We spun Dragon Chain out of Disney with Joe Roats. That turned into an ICO 6 months later. So we kind of helped some of these projects get liftoff in a particular way. And we said, based on our team and some of the ideas we have, let's start building our own tokenized networks. And so Metronome was the first internally built project. And Metronome is a new novel cryptocurrency what's novel about it is that it's autonomous. And so the last time anybody launched an autonomous piece of software, it broke Ethereum in half. That was the DAO. You know, it's like once you build it, you can't necessarily change it. And so they actually have to split the chain. Here, it's a money system that lives autonomously. So when we launched it, we have no more rights or any ability to change the code. And so it's not as complicated as what the DAO is trying to do. This is an elegant smart contract system that mints money or mints tokens a particular way on a certain curve. And so launching an autonomous network takes a lot of testing and auditing and pressure testing before you launch it, because you only have one chance to get it right. And so that was part one. Part two is it's the world's first cross-chain cryptocurrency. So you could go move from any EVM. So it's born on Ethereum, and we're going to do the first implementation into Ethereum Classic, and then open up to Quantum and EOS and some other chains. So your metronome can live. The money supply is constant across the board, but your metronome could live on different protocols. That doesn't mean that people I think are going to be jumping so much, but you have this ability, if there's this existential threat that something happens to one of these underlying security protocols, your metronome is safe. You know, it's just like this new concept of portability and self-governance. You decide where you plant your crypto asset, and so even though the white paper that we issued wasn't called a white paper, it was called an owner's manual. It's like a new relationship with your token.
So it's interesting. With EVM still being, you know, adopted widely, and Ethereum having scaling issues, do you see sort of a negative flippening where you may end up having the majority of EVM not be on the Ethereum chain in the near future?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's I keep saying this, and I guess say it until it's no longer true. We are in the stone ages of this space. Everything, I mean, look, EOS launched, what, in June-ish? That's measured in months and weeks. And so we got a lot of work to do to really scale and pressure test and find utility in these things. And you know, what's amazing is, like, yeah, we're in this crypto gully, this crypto winter. This is historically,
It's 2014 again.
we've seen this before, and it's like, this is the best time to invest, to hire, to build. No question about it. And some people have their heads in the sand. Other people are building. The stuff that is being built right now, and the capital that's still pouring into this space on a private basis is profound.
And the last crypto winter gave us Ethereum at 30 cents a token.
Yeah. No, so I kind of like relish these moments where everybody's like, it's a little quieter, not so much hype, and you know, the media news and whatever. I remember last you know, Thanksgiving, Christmas season, it was all about, you know, do you own Bitcoin? Do you have crypto? Just like, you know, people were saying 25 years ago, do you have email? Like, that was the narrative started. And obviously going through this roller coaster and being in this moment, again, the kind of quiet times are great times to build.
It's interesting because I take a lot of Ubers around town, and every time I'm in an Uber, they say, what do you do? And I say, I'm in the blockchain space. No one knows what that is. So, I mean, we're still so early that nobody even knows what that means. They've heard of Bitcoin, then they say, what's blockchain? And somehow the word Bitcoin comes out in the explanation. They say, is that still a thing? I thought it was dead.
Yeah.
I saw it on the news.
Yeah.
Is that still a thing? So we are definitely losing sort of the PR narrative because we don't have the sort of like unified machinery of like a JP Morgan or a Dr. Doom or one of that. But you know, as Trace and others have said, you know, it's fine. It'll catch up in its time.
It's amazing. I mean, and you see this where it goes from, you know, $1 to $10 to 100, 1,000, 10,000, 20,000. Once it hits one of these milestones, there's this like invisible hand that just yanks it back, right? And if we were sitting here, whatever, a year and a half ago, and I said, you know, Bitcoin was gonna, you know, 6, 7x over the next, you know, 18, 19 months, and everybody's gonna be pissed off, you'd be like, yeah, come on, that'd be awesome. And here we are, and it kind of takes some of the, you know, speculative tourists out of the equation, and that's hard because they have a bad imprint on this space because they got in at maybe a high price, and now their hands are burned from that, and so that takes time.
Same thing happened when they got in at 1,000, and they were, oh my God, what a stupid thing! I'm never going to do that again. If they just simply held on. I mean, literally the only people who've lost money in this space were the ones who got in about a 3-month period that it was over today's, out of the entire 10 years of Bitcoin.
Yeah. At the same time, it introduces, in terms of the narrative, the education and opening people's eyes about this space. So the target market and the market continues to expand despite some of that.
Okay, so maybe time for 1 or 2 questions. You've got Matt Roszak here, the man, the myth, the legend. Questions? Straight ahead. Where's Pamela? Oh, wait, Susan, you can.
Yeah, so specifically, one of the things that you brought up is your experience with open source communities and development. And I was curious, is there anything specific that you're doing with bloq, or that you sort of maybe would encourage in the space to help really enhance and accelerate the growth of those communities? Not just growth, but also in a more agnostic way, as you said, to sort of avoid the tribalism that could be a negative influence on the space.
Yeah, no, a great question, and I think you know, each of these big protocols, whether it's EOS or, you know, Consensus as the proxy for Ethereum, Tezos, they all have, you know, a war room and a whiteboard to say, how do we go to market? How do we build community and win hearts and minds? And they have plenty of capital to sprinkle at developers, invest in PowerPoints, and do that. But it's right now, it's people are just figuring that out, what that model looks like, to say, how do I get 1,000 or 10,000 developers to focus all their time and energy and hack on this stuff till 3 a.m. You know, that's the magic. Once somebody punches through that, it's gold. But right now, as developers, they're just like, man, I just learned Solidity. I got to figure out what I do next because Ethereum is down. Maybe I should look, you know, across the room at EOS and spend some time there. And so this is kind of like the navigation that's going through the developers' minds today. So I don't see that much tribalism. There's obviously a big ETH community out there, but I'm seeing new people that kind of hesitated and saw their friends go into Ethereum. They're like, the next kind of entree point seems to be EOS. There's a lot of great energy there.
Rick, you had a question?
Hey, Matt, Rick Duggan from Concierge Software Design. We do blockchain development, so I'm gonna answer a question, then ask a question. But first, I was an instructor at Georgia Tech, and Jeff was one of my students. So if I could take maybe a billionth of the credit for what he's contributed, I would like to do that right now, publicly. So yeah, we have. Thank you. Yeah. So we have done blockchain development across the chain, and we see it as completely agnostic, and our view is whatever the right tool for the job is, and each one obviously has their, you know, strengths and weaknesses. Kind of where do you see like the next big evolution of a chain? Like what's the next big contribution going to be? Obviously we know what Ethereum brought us and say what Ripple and Stellar has brought us. Do you see kind of already what might be coming?
I mean, there's a lot of these rails that are trying to, you know, build a better Ethereum, you know, with delegated proof of stake, with EOS and all these different approaches. I think there's also going to be, you know, somebody asked yesterday at the panel on Money 2020 where, you know, how many tokens will be out there. I think there's going to be millions of tokens between affinity and money and identity, and you know, it's going to be a really amazing tokenized future, which are basically just access keys to do stuff and get stuff. And then fast forwarding that, how do you manage all those tokens? Because these tokens and these systems actually suck for humans, but they're amazing for machines. And so how do you build these smarts, you know, whether this is something we think about on a particular project, on the resource management. How do I manage all my tokens, whether I send money or I want to build this thing and compute it and find my decentralized Amazon Web Services between compute, storage, access, database, and just provision that automatically so I don't have to go between Chia and Genero and Filecoin and Storj or whatever, that just dynamically does that. So there's like smarts in that on how you navigate and execute something in this tokenized world. And then, so that's gonna like maybe discovery or kind of resource management. provisioning. You want to execute something, and then there's a resource management. So all the other tokenized networks now are going to start messing around with resource management based on availability, cost, security, all these different dimensions. And then between that should be some AI, just to kind of optimize all these tokens and make it a lot easier for us as humans and make it more efficient for the machines to execute things. So I think that's a cool area that I could see this industry tripping over.
Chia? What do you think of Chia, Bramcone's Chia?
The Chia project?
Yeah.
It's a Bitcoin killer, right?
The Better Bitcoin, yeah.
I like the guys that are building it. I love innovation. All these Bitcoin forks and everything that we saw. I looked at that as a petri dish to see where innovation comes out of. These are all open source projects, so the future state of some of this will be I'll photocopy this, and this, and I'm going to create something that adds another dimension to it that's just wildly better. So I think it's interesting to see innovation. I view the team as super credible and very innovative. We'll see what happens.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Amazing.